right, welcome back to the Blitz Banter podcast. Today we are going to recap everything from week 4, talk about the last month of the NFL season, the last 4 weeks, get into some key takeaways from this past week, waiver wire pickups, and some positional rankings to end off the show. Mark, I'm going to throw it right to you to start off with some key takeaways from week 4.
Yeah, I kind of just want to start off with the Chiefs because I think there's a lot that's going to change there in fantasy. So with Rashee Rice, we don't exactly have like a confirmation of whether or not he tore his ACL, but I think there's a good chance he's going to be missing some time. And it's possible that it's the entire season. I drafted a lot of Rashee Rice, so I'm kind of upset about it, but nonetheless, we have to cover it. So with Rashee Rice going down, I think two things that no, actually three things that are taken away from this game, alongside with the Pacheco injury that happened earlier in the football season. I think one, Xavier Worthy's target volume is definitely going to go up because to me, I see him as the next runner up as like the wide receiver one on the Kansas City Chiefs. I can't see it being Juju Smith-Schuster or anyone else on the team. I think with Travis Kelce, this is definitely going to bolster his fantasy value, at least right now, until we see a game, and maybe that could not be the case. But I think with Travis Kelce, there's a good chance that his target volume is also going to go up, and he's going to have to step up, and he's going to start to produce some fantasy. This past game, I mean, Carson Steele, he only had like I don't know. He didn't have that many carries and he fumbled the ball and he gave you negative fantasy points. So, that's not great. And then Kareem Hunt, he had 14 carries for 69 yards. So it's almost 5 yards a carry. That's really good. I mean, to me, I think Kareem Hunt has solidified himself as the RB1 for the Chiefs, and he's going to get the majority of the backfield there. So, what do you guys think about that?
Hunter, go
Um,
ahead.
I'm excited for it, just because Kareem kind of started off his career with the Chiefs, and he was a baller back then. But really, since he left and went to like the Browns and a couple other stops, he just kind of went silent. And obviously, it's been like 7, 8 years now since he's been back, and I don't expect him to play like his 2017 self, where he pretty much led the league in rushing. But the Chiefs are in dire need for some offense at the moment. You got Patrick Mahomes, of course, but he's off to a really bad start, and his typical number one target, Travis Kelce, has not been there really this season. And I don't know if he really ever will be. I mean, I'm not going to say the clock is ticking, but for a superstar like that, a future first ballot Hall of Famer, it's definitely iffy. And then obviously you got Marquise Brown and Rashee Rice out for the year. So you need someone to do something on offense. Oh, also Pacheco, of course, is on the IR. So adding someone like Kareem Hunt, a veteran who has always kind of been reliable, I think it's a good pickup for them, and I look forward to seeing how he does for the next few weeks.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Hunter hit the nail on the head there. Like Mark was reading off the stats, 14 carries for 69 yards. He actually had caught another 2 passes for 16 yards. I think his production is only going to go up as the weeks go on. I think we're not only going to get Pacheco back this year, but it's not going to come until at least week 10, week 11, 12, with some of that revamp and some of that rehab that he's going to have to face. So I think what Hunter said was spot on about you got a guy who has previously played with this team. He has experience playing for Andy Reid. Now he's been away from the team for 5 years, but he's a veteran back. He can catch, he can run. I was never too confident in Carson Steele. Obviously, a rookie. It's going to take time for him to develop. Undrafted, I believe, as well. For fantasy, I never kind of took the bait on him. I never was somebody that was like, let me go grab him this week. Now, I understand if you did, because with Pacheco going down, you need to pick up the next guy in line to take on the job. Samaje Perine, I think, is fine, but now you have a true RB1 in Kareem Hunt for the time being until Pacheco comes back. Now, again, I hope he comes back this year, but with the way that some of these running backs go down, some of these injuries, you just don't know. So I think now, if you want to continue to keep this title window open and, super team window open for the Kansas City Chiefs, we talk about three-peat, we talk about dynasty, you need an RB1 in that backfield, and I think Kareem Hunt definitely gives them that.
Yeah, so I guess some of the takeaways here is that I think Kareem Hunt is still, somewhat available in most leagues. So if he's available on your waiver wire, you should absolutely go and get him. If you happen to be one of those teams that have, Xavier Worthy like on your bench because he wasn't really a startable option with Rashee Rice, leading the receiving end of the game. now I think that Xavier Worthy is potentially a flex and maybe a must-start player going forward, considering he's on the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, these are really why I have some of these takeaways is because they're on one of the best offenses in the league. And when you're on a good offense and you happen to be a really good player and a good player like Patrick Mahomes is throwing you the ball, you need to get a part of that. So I
Yeah,
think,
just before we shift to the next topic, I just looked. Kareem Hunt, obviously it's kind of waiver wire night, so this number is going to skyrocket probably. But prior to this upcoming week, he is rostered in 21.7% of ESPN fantasy leagues.
so
That's all.
absolutely go get him on the waiver wire.
I expect that number to go up to at least 50%.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
easily. Um, yeah, so pick up Kareem Hunt if you don't have him. Start Xavier Worthy if, one of your starters right now is really not producing, because I think Xavier Worthy is going to start to get 5+ targets a game as opposed to like 2 to 4 like he's normally been getting. And then as for Travis Kelce, I know he has not really been getting thrown the ball, but I think, with Rashee Rice going down, like that has to change. So why don't we stick with the tight ends? Because I think, tight ends have really been like a struggle this year. I mean, like Sam Laporta, one of the most drafted tight ends, he hasn't exactly been producing that much in fantasy. Um, Travis Kelce, same thing. I mean, Dalton Kincaid was very high up there. He's like been okay. Trey McBride, I mean, I think he's the only one that's been actually pretty decent, and I think Brock Bowers has been really good too. He has been really good. And so, I'm looking at some of these games. I mean, Tyler Conklin had a good fantasy performance. Tucker Kraft had a good fantasy performance. So for me, those are two guys you should absolutely go pick up off your waiver wire, like if they're available. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I can start with this one. If we're talking about tight end one rest of season, I might be biased since I have him in both my leagues, but I think George Kittle is absolutely in the conversation for that, along with Brock Bowers as well. Just George Kittle, I don't have his stats pulled up right in front of me right now, but he's looked unbelievable. And he had an insane touchdown catch this past week in either double or triple coverage. Now he is questionable again, has had a couple of injuries over the last few weeks. As long as he can stay healthy, him or Brock Bowers, I said in the last episode or 2 episodes ago, Brock Bowers can have that Sam Laporta rookie that comparison is there. He can have that rookie performance. Now, I know Sam Laporta isn't looking as good in that sophomore slump year right now. I think Brock Bowers could also be in that conversation, but I have George Kittle, especially with some of those weapons out. Now, obviously, Debo Samuel, I'm surprised he played last week, still banged up. If George Kittle can stay healthy, I think he is the tight end one in fantasy right now. Now I know I'm not bringing up the Cardinals tight end right now, and I'm not doing that for a reason. The reason being is I don't think the Cardinals are winning. They're winning a lot of interesting games and they're losing a lot of other games. So the Cardinals are a team that I like for fantasy, but I'm staying away right now from the Cardinals and Trey McBride. Right now, I think a favorable option, if looking at the schedule, looking at just a safe pick, I think George Kittle should be the tight end one. Now, if you want to talk about guys, if you're in a situation where you have someone like Mark Andrews or another one of these tight ends that isn't producing, Kyle Pitts, I think Tucker Kraft or Tyler Conklin, I agree with you, Mark, could be someone you pick up. But for tight end one rest of season, George Kittle has looked unbelievable. He's had a touchdown, I believe, in almost every game and has been unbelievable, especially with some of these weapons out.
Yeah. So I'll start with, I guess, the tight end one conversation. There's obviously a few you could put in there, George Kittle, Dallas Goedert, but I do agree. I think Brock Bowers really could finish the season as that guy. He's getting plenty of targets. I watched him at Georgia. Perfect little segue, by the way, into the logo right behind me here. But anyways, um, I I think he's super athletic and he gets a ton of targets on a Raiders team that's kind of collapsing at the moment. We're going to get into it later in the show, I imagine, on Davante Adams. So I won't really mention it right here, but regardless, he's getting more and more targets as the games go on. One guy that you guys haven't really mentioned yet, who I'm actually a real fan of, it's a little biased because I guess he is on my fantasy team, but Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys don't really have too many receiving options. It's kind of like just CeeDee Lamb, and there's just a big gap, and then it's probably Jake Ferguson. He had 18 targets in the last 2 games combined, of course. Can you imagine? But 18 targets in the last 2 games, and he had 13 receptions overall. I've said it before on the show that tight ends in fantasy football, there's such a thin line between the really good and like the bad, or like kind of the average and everybody else. And it's especially this year where there have really not been any tight ends that have absolutely dominated. Ferguson was a rookie, I believe, last year, and he really kind of tore it up. And I think he's on to a good track this year as well. And he is someone with all these targets, is someone that would really work out in fantasy football for the next few weeks. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, I think as far as like, waiver wire picks, like, like I would say that the guaranteed like production out of some of these tight ends, like when you drafted guys like Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, Sam Laporta, George Kittle, Brock Bowers, like the only two people. I mean, I think it's a little unfair because Trey McBride was out yesterday, so he didn't really get a chance to like solidify his argument. But really like only two guys to me like have actually really been like true like startable, like really startable tight ends like Brock Bowers and Kittle. And I think, the case for Kittle is that he seems to be like one of the most like, I don't know, Brandon Ayuk just hasn't really been playing that well. So like, George Kittle, he seems to be getting all the targets coming his way. And then with Brock Bowers, I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, he behind Davante Adams, he's just one of the top targets on the team there. So, that those were like kind of the takeaways for me because I think there's a lot of teams out there that are definitely struggling with tight end value. So that's kind of why I bring like two good names up. I mean, the reason for Tucker Kraft is that again, he's on a good offense and with Jordan Love, and if he continues to play really good football like Jordan Love usually does, then I think there's going to be a lot of targets being funneled his way, even though he's not necessarily like the number one target on the team. It's a pretty pass heavy offense. And then with Tyler Conklin, I mean, again, like over the stretch of 4 games, he doesn't necessarily have a ton of targets, but he seems to be hovering like in like the 5+ target range. So to me, when you're a tight end getting far like 5+ opportunities a game, like that's something you should go for. And like especially if you're on a bye week, I don't think, I'd be too uncomfortable starting Tyler Conklin considering Aaron Rodgers is throwing the ball. So those are just some of my takeaways with
If
Tyler
we
Conklin and Tucker
if we
Kraft.
could if we could just stick with tight ends for one more thing, just kind of going along the lines of like waiver wire pickups, Tucker Kraft and Tyler Conklin, completely agree with that. I think two guys that were probably disappointing you if you drafted them in your league are Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts, especially after last week, where both put up a goose egg in PPR leagues. I think you can get away with, I mean, I'm gonna say this, maybe it's bold, maybe it's not. Definitely sit them. If you wanted to drop Mark Andrews, I wouldn't be offended. And the reason being is he is somebody that is out there to block. He's not a pass catching tight end anymore. Isaiah Likely's out there. He's getting those targets more. Now, obviously, here and there, Lamar will throw it to him, but this is definitely a rush heavy offense with Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, Lamar Jackson. You saw the performance that Derrick Henry had this week against the Buffalo Bills. So, with that being said, I think you could get away with either dropping or sitting him. So I think going along the lines of what Mark was just saying, if you are in that position where you drafted Mark Andrews or Kyle Pitts, who me personally, I've never been a huge fan of him, even now with Kirk Cousins, I think you can get away with sitting them and or dropping them and picking up one of those guys. And I think another guy that we haven't talked about yet, I picked him up just last week. I don't know how many leagues he's still available in. But if, for me, I have George Kittle, who's consistent, but is often questionable. He does lean more towards the I'm going to play rather than going to sit this one out. But Cole Kmet on the Bears, I think as Caleb Williams continues to get better, it just feels like every week it's going to be somebody else. You don't know if Keenan Allen's going to play. DJ Moore is going to give you those 10 to 15 points every week, and then Romo Dunze will sprinkle in a couple of receptions as well. But Cole Kmet will have some games if the matchup is favorable for the Bears offense, where it's more of a boom factor than a bust factor. So if it happens to be available in your league, I don't know how many leagues he's available in, but if he is available, he's another guy I definitely would target on the waiver wire.
Yeah. So Komet, he's rostered in 63.2% of leagues, but that is a big improvement from the week before, as it is unlike there's like that plus minus feature.
Yep.
Yeah.
Plus minus was 37.1, which is like one of the most in any position. So
and I'm one of those people. George Kittle was out 2 weeks ago, and I picked him up, and he gave me, I forgot what it was. I think at least fifth. What did he have 2 weeks ago? He had a great performance. He was awesome.
I know last week, 2 weeks ago was
or last week. I'm not talking about
last
week
week.
4. Week
Yeah,
3. Week 3.
last week was the good week. Last week
Yep.
was 10 receptions for 97 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah,
That's
I
pretty
started
good.
him that week, and he was
That's crazy.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, no, all really good points. I mean, personally, I have Zach Ertz right now. I might get rid of him.
He's been
But
all
I
right
mean,
though.
he's been pretty solid. Nothing like too crazy, but I mean, with Jaden Daniels, I mean, I think he looks better than Caleb Williams at the moment. So,
A lot
and
better.
it's not a super pass heavy offense, but I think the trend of more passing as of recent has been a good sign, and the Commanders' offense has been really good through the past 3 weeks. So even in week 1 when they lost to Tampa Bay, like they were still very formidable. But let's move on from that. I kind of want to touch on, two players that I personally got really excited about after last week when Andy Dalton made his debut after however long it's been since he played a football game. Man, I just got to say the Panthers look like a totally different offense out there. They kind of went from like literally like bottom of the barrel. Like I don't even know if you could consider them the worst team in the league because they were just that bad. Like they just weren't even a team. Um, but once Andy Dalton got in there, I mean, there's Deontay Johnson getting 10 plus targets his way every single game. Chuba Hubbard averaging, you know, almost 5 yards a carry, like in both games. It might actually have been in both games, but I mean, like, to me, like, if you have Chuba Hubbard and if you have Deontay Johnson, like, these two guys are absolute must start guys now. Like, as long as Andy Dalton's leading that offense, I mean, only good things can happen for them. And I think, a guy like Xavier Legette is also someone you could potentially have as like a depth piece to your team, or if he really starts to run away with a lot of targets as well, then he might be a flex start in the coming weeks. So like, what do you guys think about the Panthers situation right now and those players that I just mentioned?
Yeah, so I have Chuba and I didn't start him this week. I have Saquon and Derrick Henry, so I was gonna start him anyways. But still, he's been excellent for the past couple weeks now. However, you got this rookie named Jonathan Brooks coming back in a couple weeks. This Texas kid, super good with the Longhorns. Not as good as Bijan, but still. But they spent like a second round pick on him. So even though Chuba Hubbard's balling out, I can't imagine that Jonathan Brooks is just going to be the backup or have significantly less snaps for the rest of the season. So I am pretty cautious with that. Deontay Johnson has been a guy that I've never wanted to draft, but he typically kind of proves me wrong. And so far, that's been the case this year. Well, really, especially the last couple of games. Obviously love Bryce Young, but it's not working right now. Andy Dalton seems to be like the much better option. They almost beat the Bengals. I mean, obviously the Bengals were 0-3 going into this game, but they're a really good team. Like they're a really talented team. Like the Ravens were 1-2 going into Monday Night Football, and they just destroyed, or no, Sunday night. Yeah, Sunday Night Football. They just destroyed the Bills, who were 3-0. Like, but everyone knew that the Ravens were a good team, despite the fact they were 1-2, and the same really goes for the Bengals.
And they would have been 3-1 if Likely wasn't out of bounds on week 1. So
Very true.
yeah.
Very true. Oh
Just
my
saying.
God. Yeah. But yeah, Deontay Johnson and Chuba have been good so far. I'm not as worried that Deontay's production is going to go down as much as Chuba's just because of Brooks. I drafted Xavier Leggett. Really didn't do much the first few weeks, and then I dropped him.
I did too, by the
Of
way.
course, he scored a touchdown, his first career
Yeah,
touchdown.
I did the same
Um,
exact thing.
yeah, like
Yeah.
he's super talented kid from South Carolina, and
Yep.
I think he'll definitely improve as the season goes on. But I wouldn't say that he's going to be like a starter for you like at any point in the season. But who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong. But again, a good depth piece. Yeah,
I'm just saying maybe in the coming weeks, like if he,
yeah,
if he also starts to get targets funneled his way and he starts producing with said target volume, like,
sure,
like anything could happen.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm high on him. I liked him at South Carolina. I dropped him in redraft, but I still have him in Dynasty, and I hope he continues to improve week by week. And I think Andy Dalton is. I think my big takeaway from the Carolina Panthers, I don't have too much on them. It's not a Dave Canales problem, and sorry, Hunter. I think it was more of a Bryce Young problem. I
Mm,
think there are a lot of it's a young team. There are a lot of young, promising players, all these weapons on offense that we're talking about. Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks is coming back. I love that you touched on that because I think he's going to be really good. I think Tremble's been okay. I mean, we'll see. I know they drafted Jatavion Sanders. He hasn't done much yet, but he's another guy for the future. I'm going to watch him. Deontay Johnson, I love what you touched on him as well. Like, he's a guy that I don't really love drafting, but he's always kind of relevant and not bad. He kind of proves us wrong. But Leggett, I mean, I'm a believer in him, and I think as long as they have a veteran quarterback or somebody who's proven to succeed and fits that offense or fits that system, like they almost beat the Bengals. Now, I don't think the Bengals are a threat anymore, even though they did win this week. I don't see them as a threat to someone like the Ravens, who are again should have been 3-1, but are 2-2 now. I am more high on the Steelers than I am on the Bengals. But somebody like the Carolina Panthers, again, a young team, as long as they have the right quarterback that fits their system. And unfortunately, Bryce Young just wasn't that. Not to say he won't be. Um, I think Canales could still prove a lot of people wrong, in Carolina. I think he's one of the best coaches that they've had in years past, a lot better than Matt Rule and other coaches that they've had. But I think it's more of a identity of who is our QB1 rather than a coaching or because they have the weapons to succeed. And Adam Thielen is there too. He's on the IR. They have veterans around them and they have young players that like Leggett, like Sanders, like Brooks, who will eventually get better over time. They just need the right quarterback. So my big takeaway or major takeaway is this was more of a Bryce Young problem than a Canales or weapons around Dalton or Young problem. So now that they have Andy Dalton starting every game, hopefully they get a couple more wins than they weren't supposed to. I know they beat the Raiders, and like I said, they almost beat the Bengals, but we'll see. I think Deontay Johnson is someone that you can confidently start as a flex. I think Chuba Hubbard is a RB2 for the time being. When these bye weeks start to kick in your leagues, these are going to be guys off your bench that Xavier will get too. That I dropped him, somebody picked him up, but you know you could throw him in there at flex. You never know when they're going to have those boom games as opposed to some of those bust games if the matchup is in their favor. So we'll see what the Carolina Panthers continue to do, but I think Dalton is definitely the answer. It's more of a Young was the problem from the time being. Dalton is more of the answer that will fix a lot of those problems on offense.
All great things said there. So I kind of want to segue into one player specifically. He's on the Jacksonville Jaguars. So a couple weeks before the fantasy season started, I was not high on Travis Etienne at all. And then I saw a lot of people, talking about how he looked good in training camp and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. Like, really is looking like a great player. And, the Jaguars are expected to correct all the wrong they did last year. And then I was like, all right, like, I think there's a chance, like, I'm gonna have faith in Travis Etienne because, he is like true bell cow running back from what we saw last year. And he was pretty good throughout the fantasy season last year. I think he finished as like the RB6 or RB5 overall. I'm not exactly too sure. Don't have the exact statistic on that. But man, I almost just wish I stuck with my gut and, realized that it's the Jaguars are just not like I don't know, something's wrong there, whether it's the coach or play calling, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. What matters at the end of the day is that the fantasy production is just not there. And the first 2 weeks with ETN, I mean, if he didn't score a touchdown in both of those games, like those are both single point fantasy games right there. So he's been getting saved by touchdown production. And then, I mean, in the, you know, this past week, he kind of just dropped you a goose egg, 11 carries for 50 yards. So he gave you 7 points in PPR fantasy. So really not good at all. But I mean, the big thing I want to talk about here is that this is really starting to look like a split backfield between Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne. And I mean, like, guys like David Montgomery are outproducing Travis Etienne now, and it's not even close. So like, I mean, if you're a Travis Etienne owner, like, do you sit him next week? Like, what do you do?
Oh
I
man,
I
seeing
think you
him.
can. I'll be honest with you, Hunter. I'll let you take it, but I
No, no,
think
no, you got it, you got it.
I don't have much on the Jaguars. I'll just say this: their offense over the last 4 weeks has looked terrible. I am not impressed with Trevor Lawrence. I don't see anybody on the Jaguars that I would start right now. Like ETN might be a flex for me. I don't know if I start him at RB1 or RB2, maybe like a flex, but I'm not starting Christian Kirk. I'm not starting Brian Thomas. I'm not starting Gabe Davis. Like, I'm definitely not starting Trevor Lawrence. I think these are all great bench players in fantasy. This is the only thing I really have to say on the Jaguars, but I'm just not impressed by their offense. And ETN's numbers have been down. And until he starts to kind of prove it more, then I'll start to, start him more. I think he's a great running back. I think he's very talented. But like you just said, Mark, RB2s on other teams like David Montgomery um, are starting to produce more than Travis Etienne, who was a top 5 running back at a time last year. And I think that alone just goes to show you that he's clearly not himself right now. And the Jaguars are clearly not themselves. And Doug Peterson, as a matter of fact, I don't know if he's going to last if this continues. Like, because right now, I mean, I'm a Giants fan. I think that team looks worse than the New York Giants. I know the New York Giants are 1-3 and they look bad, but the Jacksonville Jaguars, I have not seen anything positive out of them the last 4 weeks. And this is a team that a lot of people picked borderline playoff team, right? Like a lot of people picked them to make the playoffs. Like I personally didn't. I thought they were going to be okay. I didn't think they'd be this bad, but I don't see anybody on the Jaguars right now that I'm starting. Again, maybe you can still start ETN and believe in him, but right now, for the time being, until they start to prove it, and this is the last thing I have to say, I can't see anyone I'm starting for week 5.
Yeah. So in 2022, Packers started off, I think it was like 3-7, and then they win like 6 of their next 7 games, somehow make the playoffs, and they come back from down like 27 against the Chargers and they win the game. And right then and there, I'm like, oh, this is going to be a team to like, that's going to be really threatening next season, which was 2023 season. And that just was not the case. Like, they were not that good last year. And I will say this every year before the season starts, I kind of like have like 3 teams that I'm really looking forward to watching. Last year was the Lions, the Seahawks, and the Jaguars. And one of those teams panned out, obviously. Lions, Seahawks weren't so great, but they're now it looks like they are. They're doing all right. But the Jaguars were a real bummer last year, and it seems like nothing has been fixed. If anything, everything is getting worse. As you mentioned, ETN was very solid last year, but now he's off to a really bad start. And I don't really know. Pretty much exactly what you just said. Like, there is no one that could start on that team right now. Like, Trevor Lawrence got this massive deal, and it would have made sense if he got that deal
I
after the
got about that.
2022 season.
Yeah.
He got it after last year's mid-season. And they even in the first home game, they like changed like the what's it called? The stadium name to like instead of it being like Everbank Stadium, it was like
Yeah,
Trevor
Trevor
Bank
Bank.
Stadium.
Yeah,
Like, what has he done to deserve this?
they
And
did
then they,
that for the home opener, right?
yeah, it was for the home
Yeah.
opener, and then they
They
lose.
like worship him and pray. You're right. I forgot about the contract. They made him one of the highest paid quarterbacks at the time that
Yeah,
they offered it. Yeah, that I don't understand it. I do
no,
not
yeah.
understand
I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
so to go back to your original question about Travis Etienne, he's just as long as the Jaguars play poorly, I think he's going to go down that path as well, especially with sharing a backfield with Tank Bigsby. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, well said.
thank you.
well said by everyone. I mean, it's funny in the running back rankings I put out in this past, for week 4, uh, someone I know, and you know who you are, decided to start Travis Etienne over Kenneth Walker. And I had Kenneth Walker in my top 15 or Charbonnet, depending on who started, because I think they're both top 15 options. Travis Etienne was not in there. And what did Kenneth Walker give you? 33 fantasy PPR points. What did Travis Etienne give you? 7.
3 touchdowns.
So that's like league winning, like changing numbers right there. But I mean, like,
I think having Kenneth Walker healthy and Charbonnet looked good too, even when K9 was out. But just having him healthy because this was his first game back, and a lot of people weren't high on him, saying, "Oh, he's coming back from an injury. He'll have a pretty good
yeah,
week." But having 3 total touchdowns, 33 fantasy points. I mean, having him healthy makes such a difference. And they still lost this game, Seahawks. But fantasy wise, I mean, he's a must start, Kenneth Walker.
I thought he was gonna give you like at least 15 fantasy
Yeah,
points, and
yeah,
that's what he gave you without the touchdown. So like I was right.
you were.
I mean, like, yeah. So yeah, like, I mean, personally, like, if I'd started David Montgomery over Travis Etienne at this point until he turns it around. But I mean, why don't we segue into something else? I mean, I didn't have this written down, but one thing that I do want to mention, it's with the Saints. Rashid Shaheed is getting like lots of target volume, like right alongside Chris Olave. And I know Chris Olave, like, he's considered to be the wide receiver one on this offense, but I mean, he had 10 targets and Shaheed had 11. Like, and Shaheed has been getting like a lot of target volume so far this year. And then like at some point, like, when are we gonna sit here and say, okay, like, these two guys might actually be a lot closer than we once thought. Like, I mean, like, if you're a team that has Shaheed on your bench, like, do you flex him? Like, is he like a guy that should be started? Like, I don't know. Like, it's interesting because like historically, like, Olave has been always getting the targets funneled his way, but like this year, like, Shaheed's been getting like 5+ targets a game. Like, I'm not saying 5 targets is wide receiver one numbers, but like 5+ targets a game, like, on average tends to be a guy that you start in your starting lineup depending on the offense that he's in. So like, I mean, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah. So, first of all, going into the season, you'd be a liar if you said you drafted Shaheed. There's just no way you did. And now, 4 weeks in, he should be definitely on rosters. He's on plenty of them, actually. He's on 82% of leagues have him rostered, which is correct. That's the way it should be. But I what I will say is the Saints in the first 2 weeks of the season looked like gods. Like they were getting like 40 plus points per game and just dominating. They beat the Cowboys and they beat the Panthers, and it was like, oh, all right, it's the Panthers. And then they get the same exact score pretty much against the Cowboys. But now it seems like that's kind of wound down a bit. But Shaheed's volume is still definitely clicking a bit. So yeah, I think he's definitely getting in that flex area. I don't know if he's ready for the wide receiver 2 spot yet. Because I think not last week, but the week before he had literally zero.
Nothing.
Like he didn't do
Yeah.
anything. So Consistency is obviously a big part of fantasy football. You want to get guys that are consistent, and I'm not saying he's inconsistent just because of one game, but it's just something to watch for because, like you said, he's got a couple of guys around him that can take away those targets. I mean, Chris Olave is technically the number one receiver. The three of us have spoken about him before, saying that he really shouldn't be ranked so highly in fantasy every year, but that's just the way it's been. So just in general, Shaheed is definitely getting towards that flex option area, but we need to see the Saints get a few more wins and just kind of show that their 2 40-point games at the beginning are not necessarily a big fluke.
Yeah, I mean I agree completely. I think Shaheed is a good flex option. I think if you have him, you can start him. But I don't know if I'd start him over somebody like Wan'Dale Robinson, and I think it goes back to the consistency factor. This week he did well. I mean, 11 targets, 8 receptions, 83 yards, and he averaged 10 yards per catch, which is very good for a flex. But like Hunter just said, Chris Olave is still the wide receiver one there, and even somebody like Taysom Hill, I thought played really well. I know he got injured. I had this game for Sirius XM, but I thought Taysom Hill had a great game. You know, he had 2 touchdowns, and he can kind of be that running back, tight end, quarterback, receiver, kind of everything. But Shaheed's going to have to stay healthy and he's going to have to stay consistent because you're right. In that Eagles game, he was targeted 5 times. He didn't have a catch. And then, first 2 weeks, he's putting up 70 yards and then 95, 96 yards, 24 yards per catch in both games. And the Saints are looking like one of the best teams in the NFC and in the league. But again, they're playing the Panthers and the Cowboys, who we've gone on the record saying are frauds. So the Saints are going to need to do well. Derek Carr's going to need to do well. And I think Shaheed's going to have to continue to be consistent to be an every day, every week flex. But for now, I think he's going to be, I've kind of used the term a little bit this episode, but when those bye weeks, because now we're entering the bye weeks, we're entering week 5. When those bye weeks start to go into effect, I think he's going to be a guy that you could definitely start, but he's not a every week starter. I'm still starting Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm probably still starting Darnell Mooney. I'm probably still starting a couple other guys over Shaheed. I don't think it's as close to Olave as possible, or as people are saying. I know Olave got off to a slow start this year. I still think he's the wide receiver one and a bit more talented, but that's not to knock Shaheed at all. I think he's very good and a very good wide receiver too for the Saints, but we'll see. They're sitting at 2-2 right now. They're going to have to be a winning team. They're going to have to do well in the NFC South this year. And, if they want to make the playoffs, I think Shaheed's going to have to be a big part of it. So would I start him every week at flex? Not necessarily, but now that we're entering those bye weeks, I think he could be a good option for you, again, if the matchups are favorable for him.
All right. Awesome. I kind of just want to, we did talk about waiver wires a little bit throughout this segment so far, but I kind of want to start to jump into like the waiver wire picks. So for me, one of the biggest waiver wire pickups I think people can make is Dontavian Wicks. Now, when I'm looking at his stats through 4 games, it's not exactly all that impressive. Like 22 targets, only 8 receptions, 104 receiving yards. It's not necessarily that great. But I think, Malik Willis was playing through the first couple of games of the season, but now Jordan Love is back. And with Jordan Love back, I mean, not Malik Willis, I'm sorry. Dontavian Wicks looked outstanding against the Vikings. And I know that performance came towards the end of the game. But I mean, it's not something that can be ignored. Like when someone performs well and he's not rostered on most teams, like that's what you do. You attack the waiver wire and go get that player depending on what your team looks like. So I mean, like, do you think he's like one of the guys that from this past week he should absolutely be a waiver wire pickup? Like, what do you guys think?
Dontavian Wicks?
Yeah.
I think so. I believe Christian Watson got hurt, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yes.
Jaden Reed has looked like their best receiver. It's so tough. The Packers are such a tough team. I am high on Wicks, don't get me wrong. But I also am high on Romeo Doubs, and I do like Jaden Reed, especially what he did this week. I think you can definitely pick him up and stash him, but I think I'm looking at a couple of other receivers that I might pick up. I mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson as someone that I really like. I think Kareem Hunt, if you're looking for a running back, is somebody that you could definitely pick up. I wouldn't be opposed to picking up Wicks. I think he's definitely, again, somebody that you could stash. I almost would rather stash Tucker Kraft if we're talking about the Green Bay Packers, because we're let off the show with tight ends, and we're talking about all these tight ends that haven't worked out. And right now, Tucker Kraft is only rostered by 4%. So
Yeah.
he would be a guy that I target a little bit more, just because you don't know with these receivers. But I do think you could get away with picking up Wicks or one of these Packers pass catchers now with Christian Watson going down.
Pretty much what Adam said about Wicks. I've said on the show in the past that Packers have like 5 receivers that could not necessarily start in fantasy, but Jordan Love loves Jordan Love loves to spread the ball around to guys like Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson when he returns, which by the way, I was getting notifications today while I was working, so I didn't see what it was, but I saw his name on it and it said that he escaped a severe injury. So
That's
he
good.
might be back in a week or two. But
That's good.
so Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Bo Melton, it's so spread out, but each of them seem to produce a decent amount. I think all of them are probably getting like 7, 8 a week. Except for Reed. I think he's probably getting like 15 or so.
Yeah, I think he's the clear cut one, but it's so
Yeah,
tough. Like that
which is
team is so tough.
surprising. It's surprising because I thought that would be Watson's role. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
Watson's been hurt, but still. But I guess for my waiver wire pickups, geez, I can't speak today. But we might have touched on it before, like in a past podcast, but I think Braylon Allen, is a good choice. Jets running back. Breece Hall, and him seem to have kind of a 1-2 punch going. Breece was a consensus top 3 pick in fantasy football.
Just want to plug it in real quick. Braylon
Yeah.
Allen was someone I mentioned on the Instagram last week. So if you guys
Yeah.
haven't seen that, go check it out because I still think those waiver wire pickups are even relevant in this week. I'm
For
coming
sure.
up with
Absolutely.
new names to be added because yeah.
Yeah, and Braylon Allen has proved your point that he's definitely worthy of being picked up. I mean, him and Breece are getting kind of similar carries the last couple of weeks, which is a little scary for Breece Hall owners, but it's great for guys that are picking up Braylon Allen, who they got for free.
Right here.
Yeah, you right
Yep.
there.
I,
He's
I
kind of
picked him up 2 weeks ago, I think. Like
There
I
you
picked him
go.
up for the Patriots game, but I didn't. That was 2 weeks ago, right? The primetime Patriots game that they Jets blew out the Pats, or was that last week? The Thursday night game.
that was I think last week.
Okay, I picked him up for that, but I stashed him on my bench, and he did great that game. And he didn't have a bad week this week. I mean, I think he got like what 8 or 9 points, something like that.
That's more than Breece did.
Exactly.
And one wide receiver, another guy that I probably touched on in the past, but I think he kind of proved again that he should be picked up. Juwan Jennings had like 200 yards receiving 2 games ago and 3 touchdowns, I think, something like that, or 2 touchdowns, something like that. Something he has never even been thought of to do, basically, those numbers. And
Yeah.
Deebo Samuel came back. That was unexpected. I really didn't. I started Juwan Jennings. He still finished with double-digit points. Only had a couple receptions, but they were for long gains. I think he only had like 3 receptions or 4 receptions total, but he is proven to be a target on this Niners offense that is loaded with talent. And obviously you have players that are hurt right now. I mean, I don't know what Kittle's status. I'm assuming Kittle's going to play next week. I'm assuming Debo's going to play next week. Obviously, CMC will not. But Ayuk is not done really much yet, and Juwan has proven to be a solid target for Brock Purdy.
Yeah, couple waiver wire pickups. If Justin Fields hasn't been grabbed yet, I mean, I'm looking at it right now. Bleacher Report
I was
posted
going
an
to mention
article.
him. Go ahead.
Yeah, 31% rostered. I mean, pick this guy up. I know they lost this week to Joe Flacco and the Colts, but he still looked great. And I know I posted a YouTube short. It got a lot of traction, got like 8,000 views. A lot of people were saying, oh, he's not a franchise quarterback yet, this or that. Maybe he's not the franchise quarterback yet. Let me just address that. But he is on his way. He is on track. He's on pace to being the franchise quarterback. He's only 25 years old. And as long as Russell Wilson, I said this last week, and I'm going to say it again. I know they lost, but it wasn't necessarily his fault. He threw for over 300 yards. Like, don't sleep on him. If he's not picked up in your league, he's a great, fantastic backup quarterback. And he finally, I think he showed signs of this, flashes of this in Chicago, but he finally fits this Mike Tomlin, Arthur Smith offense in Pittsburgh. And I know everybody says, well, Kenny Pickett took them to the playoffs. They finish over 500 every year. Look, I know they lost to the Colts. I know it was, but some of these turnovers, these careless turnovers, were not his fault. Defensive problems, not his fault. I still love TJ Watt. I think that a franchise quarterback is a quarterback that makes the offense look better. And over the last 4 weeks, a game that they should have won against the Colts and it was completely out of his control, and then 3 other wins, he is on his way to being that. They haven't had a good quarterback since Roethlisberger. Russell Wilson is not that. Kenny Pickett clearly wasn't that. Justin Fields, 25 years old, a fantastic backup. Again, with these bye weeks, you're going to have to start somebody at quarterback. Only rostered by 31% of leagues. I would pick him up if he's already rostered in my league, but if he's not, I don't know what you're doing. Pick him up. I mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson. He's a PPR merchant. We were talking a little bit about it before we started recording. Obviously, I'm a Giants fan, and I've been watching him. He's not a guy that's going to get you a lot of yards. He's not going to get you a lot of touchdowns. He only has 1 touchdown this week. And ironically, it was, I think, week 2 where he had the least amount of fantasy points, but that touchdown gave him 9 or whatever he ended up finishing with. Regardless, Daniel Jones loves to target him, and he's going to get you a lot of catches. So PPR, I'm looking at Wan'Dale Robinson as a guy. So Fields, Wan'Dale Robinson, we talked about Tucker Kraft, Kareem Hunt, we touched on, and Tank Bigsby. Why not? I'm not starting anybody on the Jaguars yet, but we don't know what's going to happen with ETN. Bigsby's only rostered in 11% of leagues, and he's splitting carries with ETN. So sort of like a Breece Hall, Braylon Allen situation where it's like we knew that Breece Hall was going to be the number 1, but now Braylon Allen is kind of emerging out of nowhere. Tank Bigsby, I think, was a rookie last year, and everybody thought, oh, this guy could take a big step forward. Well, now I think he's actually finally taking that step forward. I don't think he's there yet. And again, I think this Jaguars offense has really had nothing to prove. But I think if ETN goes down with an injury, God forbid, or if his production continues to go down week by week, Bigsby could be a guy that I look to stream in the coming weeks. And again, I don't know if I'm starting him yet, but until Jacksonville starts to win, I think he's a guy that I definitely would pick up too. So those are just a couple of names that I'm looking at in the waiver wire this week.
All right. Yeah, I think Adam and Hunter kind of took away some of the waiver wire pickups I was gonna say. So that's all right. That's really all of my waiver wire claims. And I think moving forward with fantasy, look to start guys like Xavier Worthy, because I definitely think he could potentially be a league winner considering the situation that's going on in Kansas City. I think with Travis Kelce, the thing there is that I think he's going to start to get more target volume and more opportunity. So I think you can feel comfortable about starting him, even though he's been not so great in the first few weeks. Kareem Hunt, if he's still available in leagues, which we discussed he is, he might just be the number 1 waiver wire pickup you should absolutely go after. So, because he's now the RB1 for the Chiefs, and the Chiefs are the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the top 5 offenses in the league. Gotta go after that. I think as we've discussed on this episode so far, having players on good offenses is very important. So like when we look at guys like Travis Etienne, like yeah, he's very talented, but like what's he going to produce for you in fantasy if they're not really getting in the red zone that much? So, these are all things that are really important. Like I'm looking to start guys like David Montgomery over Travis Etienne because he's getting more opportunity and he's on a split backfield himself. So, you know, that's just kind of some of my things I took away from fantasy and moving forward. Like I said, Xavier Worthy, Travis Kelce, Kareem Hunt, like those are all guys that you should absolutely, start. I don't know if Kareem Hunt is necessarily a start, but like he has good potential to be like the bell cow running back in Kansas City. And I think, he actually, should be a start in fantasy. So, that is really everything from me. And so again, with the tight ends, like Tucker Kraft, absolutely a target on the waiver wire I'd be going for. And then Tyler Conklin, he's just another name I mentioned because he seems to get targets funneled his way on the Jets offense. So, that's really it for me. What do you guys have to say?
I guess I have two things. Really, they kind of go hand in hand, sort of fantasy related, definitely football related. The Kansas City Chiefs, we alluded to this before, but Rashee Rice went down with an injury this week, and Mahomes, greatest quarterback in the game right now, injured his best receiver. So obviously, over the last few days, there have been talks of, what teams could be selling receivers. Obviously, the Giants are one of them. I kind of mentioned this before with Wandale Robinson looking good and obviously, Malik Neighbors being the wide receiver one, I think two people that could be sold, and Hunter actually mentioned this a few weeks ago. Jalen Hyatt doesn't get a lot of snap, like his snap percentage is not high. They do not use him at all, and I don't understand why. So I think for that reason, they could either sell him in a similar to a Kadarius Toney kind of deal that would open the door for other guys to step up and also give Hyatt the opportunity to be that wide receiver too and complement, somebody like Xavier Worthy on the Chiefs. But we're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs, right? This is a team that's going for the three-peat. They have the best, dynasty right now, the best quarterback, the best offense, like you were just saying, Mark. They could also trade Darius Slayton and give, open the door for Jalen Hyatt to be that wide receiver 3 in the Giants. Slayton, who's been the wide receiver 1 for years in New York before Malik Neighbors and Wandale kind of broke out this year. So, in a similar deal to Kadarius Toney, where the Giants will be getting picks back. And then you look at guys like Amari Cooper, who could also be an option for Kansas City with Hollywood Brown and Rashee Rice injured. Could they bring Tyreek Hill back? I don't think he's on the market right now. Taking him out of that dumpster fire in Miami would be good for him. But another guy, and we haven't mentioned this yet too, I really want to touch on it tonight, is Davante Adams, who it looks like might get traded as early as this week. I don't think he's going to the Kansas City Chiefs, but I am kind of curious your guys' take on like if Rashee Rice is out long term. I guess it's a two-part question. What will the Kansas City Chiefs do? Will they trade for, somebody like Cooper, Davante Adams potentially, or one of these Giants receivers? And then going off of the Davante Adams thing, where do you see him landing? Because it looks like he's out of Vegas.
I just want to touch on this really quickly. Before this episode, I was like, oh, Davante Adams, perfect Kansas City Chiefs candidate, like great. He should absolutely go there. But when I look at the Kansas City Chiefs, they have guys like Rashee Rice, and they have guys like Xavier Worthy, and they have guys like Travis Kelce, and they also have some other depth pieces there as well. So like, yeah, like you could add Davante Adams to get you to the Super Bowl if that's really what you're looking for. But I don't really think when I look at the Kansas City Chiefs, it's not really a team that needs a guy like Davante Adams in order to make it to the Super Bowl because they always find a way to get it done. And, when Tyreek Hill left, like Patrick Mahomes still got it done. So, like, could they add Davante Adams? Yes. Would I like to see Davante Adams go to the Kansas City Chiefs and ultimately win a Super Bowl? Yes. But I think the more primary candidate for Davante Adams would be the New York Jets. And personally, like I know Garrett Wilson is the number one guy on the Jets, but he doesn't really look like a number one guy. Like when you, especially in fantasy, when you draft a guy like Garrett Wilson as high as you did in the first or second round of your drafts, he's not really producing that much for you in fantasy. And guys like Rashee Rice or you know Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr. have been more of a league winner, upside player than Garrett Wilson has. And that's kind of what we expected out of Garrett Wilson to be the league winner. So, if I'm the New York Jets, I'm hopping on a call right now with the Raiders, and I'm saying I want Davante Adams. And for fantasy purposes, like this could be your sign to target Davante Adams and maybe,
Buy low.
try to trade for him if you can. Or, if I have Davante Adams, I'm holding him because, if he gets traded to either one of those teams, like that's already an upgrade on the offensive end, and that's going to be good for fantasy production. So
Yeah.
that's
I
my
I mean,
take on
buy
that.
low. It seems like he's going to go join a contender, right? Like if he's going
Yeah.
to be dealt out of Vegas, he's going to join a contender. I like the Jets pick. I mean, a lot of people are saying that. Hunter, I'm curious your opinion on it too.
Yeah. So a few months ago, Garrett Wilson, when because everyone Devontae Adams has like said like everyone like thinks that oh Devontae's unhappy Las Vegas or whatever. And like he said multiple times, like, oh, I'm not unhappy, whatever. Clearly that's not the case. It's requested a trade today. But a couple months ago, before the season started, Garrett Wilson said something. I don't know whether he tweeted out or Instagram or it was just a quote that I read. But he said something along the lines of I could like change my 17, my number for you, because that's Davante's number, should he join the Jets. So that immediately became the top target in mind for me. And it's obviously not because of his number, it's because of the quarterback. The guy that made Davante Adams, really Davante Adams. It's not to disrespect Davante Adams, of course, but that's how he started his career. He got drafted to the Packers in 2014. He was part of that draft class with like OBJ and DeAndre Hopkins and a couple other guys, a couple other receivers. And he was one of the later round guys and wasn't as well known as rookie year. But then when he kind of started out in like 2015 area, he like immediately emerged. And then really from 2017 to like 2021, best receiver in the game, hands down. And for him to reunite with his quarterback, who won, I think, like 2 MVPs during the time that Adams was a star, be insane. Like it would break the internet if he were to go to the Jets. Right now, I think that's probably the number one option. Jets receivers, kind of like as Mark said, I've never been a tremendous fan of Garrett Wilson. I do agree that even though like he's considered a first or second round pick in fantasy, his points don't really back that up. Um, Jets spent money on Mike Williams this offseason. That really hasn't worked out yet. He's barely played. Alan Lazard last season was terrible,
Like their best receiver this year.
but he's like their best receiver this year. It's very
Exactly. Yeah.
Another thing about Alan Lazard, guess where he played before the Jets and the
The
quarterback.
Packers.
Green Bay.
And Davante Adams is much better than Alan Lazard. So
Much
it would
better.
really be something if he were to go there. Now, if he were to go to like obviously Adam said a title contender is probably the best fit. I don't know if the Jets are at that level yet. They're getting there. Believe me, they're getting there. As someone who has said for years that they were terrible, even though some people were like, oh no, they're gonna make the playoffs, they're gonna break the drought. I'm now saying they're actually a very solid team, very talented overall. But they do need another receiver to help them out. But should he go to like a contender like the Chiefs? I mean, man, that would be really something.
Talk
Patrick
about break the
Mahomes,
internet. That would break the
yeah, that's way bigger.
internet.
Like that's
Yeah.
Mahomes and Davante Adams on the same team. I mean,
I think I would like that better than Tyreek Hill, to be honest.
Sure.
yeah, you're probably right. I mean,
Well, Tyreek Hill is pretty young when they played together, so I
but
don't
he's
know,
still a
maybe
beast.
maybe
He's still
not, but like I
a
just
multi-time Pro Bowler. Yeah.
like I consider Justin Jefferson to be the best receiver in the game, but like
Yep.
I watched the receiver documentary,
Yeah,
and
same.
Justin Jefferson models his game after Davante Adams,
Yeah.
and a lot of receivers do. So like, even though Davante Adams isn't my number one guy, he's in my top five for sure as a receiver. Just like
So
overall,
what makes Adams so good is his route
yeah,
running ability.
yeah,
Like
that's what
every
Justin
like
Jefferson touched on.
yeah, like receivers. Okay, yeah, perfect. Receivers, they all have like their certain archetypes that stand out. Tyreek Hill is speed. DeAndre Hopkins is his hands, and Justin Jefferson obviously is a mix of everything.
Everything.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
Davante Adams, hands down, I've never seen in my lifetime of watching football, I've never seen someone who runs routes better than he does. And obviously he's in his early 30s now, so he's not as like necessarily his 2018, 2019 self, but I guarantee you put him on a title contender team or someone like the Jets where he has his old quarterback, he could get back to definitely maybe even definitely Pro Bowl status, but All Pro is definitely not out of the conversation.
Yeah.
So actually two things. Mark, I'm glad you brought up the receiver show because we got more of an inside look of Davante Adams and Justin Jefferson and some of these receivers. if you remember from that docuseries, Davante Adams was pissed last year before Pierce was hired. And like, I thought at that part of the season, it almost looked like he was going to want out and request a trade then when they
Yeah.
had like Garoppolo starting before
Like,
Aiden O'Connell and whoever, like the first half of last year did not go the way the Raiders anticipated. So I thought that he wanted it out of Vegas last year. So if you go back to that documentary, like I do remember him like being pissed off. And then when Antonio Pierce came in, they started winning more, and he was like, okay, I think I like how things are going in Vegas. The second thing I want to say is I'm going to propose this too. We're talking about title contenders. We haven't brought up the Ravens. Mark, I was talking to you earlier before we started recording, and I said it too. I alluded to it. This team would have been 3-1 if Likely didn't step out of bounds on week 1. You guys laughed, but they would have been. And they just hooked down the Bills, like demolished the Buffalo Bills, who people were saying, us included, looked like the best team in the AFC. Now, obviously, the Chiefs the best team in the AFC, and probably in general until they, don't win the Super Bowl. But the Ravens are there. Like I was saying, I don't think the Bengals are as much of a threat to them. I think the only threat to them are themselves and obviously the Chiefs. I think the Bills are still a threat, but if they do anything like they do, going forward, if they can take down the Buffalo Bills like how they did this past week, I think this team could be in that title contender conversation. And I know Hunter picked them to go to Super Bowl. The reason I bring them up is their wide receiver one is Zay Flowers. We talked about Mark Andrews. He's not really that pass catching tight end as much as he was in years past. Derrick Henry, I mean, he looks unbelievable. Justice Hill, you could argue, is probably their wide receiver too after Zay Flowers. Because, I mean, like this guy, yes, he's a running back. And you have Isaiah Likely, Evershad Bateman, you have Nelson Aguilar, but they really don't have a true wide receiver 1 or 2 or 1A, 1B after Zay Flowers. Again, you have Andrews now blocking for Derrick Henry, who, this past week on the Buffalo Bills defense, who looked great, rushed for 200 yards and had 2 touchdowns and opened up the game with an 87-yard, run for a touchdown. So could they be a team that adds a wide receiver kind of like Davante Adams? I'm curious, would you guys see them as a title contender? Somebody, because again, this is like we were saying before, it's a run first offense. You have guys like Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Justice Hill's a running back, but he's more of a pass catching back. Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson are really your true rushers. But as far as receiving goes, it's really only Zay Flowers and a little bit of Justice Hill. Could they add someone like Davante Adams? Do you guys? I'm curious your take on that.
I think I think they could. I mean, I don't know. It's just tough because when I look at the Baltimore Ravens, like I think, they've solidified themselves as like the extreme run first like offense in the league. But personally, like I'm going into fantasy drafts this year, I was a very big believer in Zay Flowers, and I don't really want to let the last 2 games like deter how I think about Zay Flowers because personally, I think Zay Flowers is a very talented player. And when he gets a lot of targets funneled his way, like we've seen, it turns into fantasy production. So like Zay Flowers to me is one of those wide receivers and in football, when he gets the ball thrown to him, he can make something happen. Um Now, like, would they add Davante Adams? Like, if they added Davante Adams, like, it would 100% open, all of the offense. Because right now, for the past 2 games, the entire offense is just Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. It's just those 2 people. It's no one else. Like, that's the entire offense. The entire offensive scheme is based on Lamar Jackson running the ball or Derrick Henry running the ball. And that's really it. Um, if they added Davante Adams, I mean, like, I think like in terms of like the Ravens being a Super Bowl contender, I really don't think it would make sense because, and I say that because I just think the way that the Ravens offense is ran, it's more favorable for them to rely on a guy like Derrick Henry to run the ball which also complements Lamar Jackson's ability to run the ball because now if you're a defense, you're like, well, who's going to run the ball, Lamar or Derrick Henry, who can both explode for like at least 10 yards a carry. Like, it's crazy. So, like, yeah, if the Ravens wanted to become more of a pass, catching team, then yeah, I think Davante Adams would be a great fit. But I mean, to me, like the two teams that I think that he would be a great fit on right now is, like I said, the Jets and the Chiefs. So I think that's, I don't really think he'd have the best chances of winning a Super Bowl on the Jets, but like if he was to get traded and he wants to be like the guy that he used to be, because right now, like the past 2 years on the Raiders, like, he doesn't really look to be like the guy that he wants to be, and we all know he can be. So yeah, I think the Jets and the Chiefs would be the best fit for him. And in terms of the Chiefs, I think, I don't it's just tough with the Chiefs even because like because their wide receiver depth is pretty, it's pretty deep. So it's kind of hard to just throw a guy like Davante Adams. I think it would be a similar situation with the Texans where they added Stephon Diggs, but like Nico Collins is still their guy. So that's kind of what I think about that.
Yeah, it's fair.
I like the idea of him on the Ravens actually. I mean, no matter what, this is a guy that's been one of the best receivers in the NFL for the last 7, 8 years now. And regardless of where you put him, he's gonna somewhat improve the team, no matter the scheme that they play. To be a Super Bowl winning team, you need to be good on through the air and the ground. Obviously, the Ravens are good through the ground. I don't think there's any other team that even touches them. And Lamar, Derrick Henry are obviously the reasons for that. And even without Derrick Henry, Lamar alone would still be near the top. Um, excuse me. So Lamar is a quarterback in the National Football League. Obviously, he's known for his running ability, but I'm sure he could throw when the time is needed. He's won 2 MVPs, and it's not because all he does is run. He passes the ball too. I'm not gonna say he's the best passer in the league by any means, but having a guy like Davante Adams would really impact him as a passer, and that itself would elevate them to win after win after win and potentially make a Super Bowl run. Last year, they were the number one overall team in the AFC. And their best receiver then was Zay Flowers too. He was a rookie then. Mark Andrews was injured pretty much the entire year, anyways. So they obviously didn't necessarily need a receiver last season, but they didn't get those 2 extra wins because they lost in the AFC Championship game. So having that receiving option will allow the opposing defenses to focus. They'll have to focus on multiple things instead of just stopping the run.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I don't have anything else regarding Davante Adams or the Kansas City Chiefs. I just wanted to bring up those two things because I just, obviously Davante Adams requesting out of Vegas as of today, as of Tuesday of recording this, and the Kansas City Chiefs and Rashee Rice, and just the Chiefs are always in the news. So I wanted to bring up those ideas and get your guys' opinions and takes on that. Well, that pretty much wraps up this week's episode. Just breaking down a couple positional rankings, some waiver wire pickups for who you could pick up for week 5 and beyond, and just some takeaways from week 4. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, Blitz Banter Pod. We'll be posting our rankings every week, some waiver wire pickups for you there as well. And of course, some hilarious memes that Mark has done a great job putting together. Great content over there. If you haven't already, subscribe us. It helps the show out. We're posting a lot on YouTube Shorts, a lot of videos coming out every week. Again, just about your fantasy football team and trying to help you win. And again, thanks so much for watching, and best of luck to your teams this week.